Welcome back to Three Simple Men making their way through the galaxy. First of all, welcome to the year 2024. It's a new year, but it's the same us. It's the same Star Wars that we love. It's me, I'm Tom. Ryan and Mike, and we're back in for another week's episode of the Clone Wars, episode 14 of the first season.
Defenders of Peace.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey,
I knew it was Defenders or something, but fellas, how do you think about the episode?
oh, hold on. May the year 2024 be with you, right?
Likewise. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to 2024. We got a great year ahead of us and a lot of Star Wars content to talk about. So, we really appreciate our fan base staying with us, and we're hoping that, it grows. We can attract new viewers. So welcome aboard. We got a lot to cover here. So just going off of last week's episode, we saw this concept of what it means to be a peacekeeper versus holding to your values. But with this week's episode, that theory is being put to the test now that you have an enemy knocking on your doorstep, and it really challenges your values. So there's definitely a lot to talk about with this week's episode. So Brian, I'm going to let you take it away and just
right into the quote.
Right into it. Let's go.
When surrounded by war, one must eventually choose a side. And I want to say last episode, I didn't think the quote was very fitting. This episode, it is extremely fitting.
Mm-hmm.
Go. I mean, we're on the planet. We got it named this episode, even though we talked about last episode, thanks to Mike. We're on the planet Meriden. Not Meriden, Connecticut. But Meriden. And I did notice this, but the species are called the Lurmen, which not only do they look like lemurs, and I thought that was lazy, you can't spell Lurmen without lemur. They just added an N and they scrambled the letters around. It's lazy. I'm sorry. I mean, that being said, the character, like this idea, this part lazy, the theme of this episode, though, and where this episode goes, I think, is a really good, and we haven't talked about it in a while. Maybe we have, maybe I don't remember. But, the biggest thing that I feel like we're kind of, at least for me, hoping that we can bring to people is that watching this animated series can be just as great and rewarding as watching the live action stuff. And there's always this kind of thought process that, like, oh, the cartoons are cartoons. But the themes in this episode are intense. They're certainly not childish. I mean, we basically see, and I'm going to jump ahead to kind of what happens this entire episode, but we basically see the separatist army looking to test a nuke, for lack of a better term.
I was going to say napalm.
Yeah, it is. Napalm. You're right. That's actually napalm. Better. But not only test napalm, like you would just be like, hey, let's see what napalm does to this field. They want to test it on actual living, I guess a field is living, but actual sentient beings, right?
Anything organic.
There is no doubt after watching this episode in my mind, and I know we talked about last episode that, like, oh, the Jedi aren't really peacekeepers. They're kind of on a downward spiral, but there is no doubt after this episode that the Separatists are the bad guys. They are evil because there has been no thought or discussion of the Republic being like, yeah, let's just test our freaking lightsabers on these random,
make a mini young Slayer 9000 over here. But yeah, I mean, I hate to steal a quote from you, Ryan. I apologize in advance, but it's like you got this conflict of let us stand by our ideals. Like, you got this one group that's peacekeepers, but then you got the Jedi who claim to be the defenders of peace, and you really see this contrast against a separatist army that's ready to nuke you. And, like, not only do they have, like, this napalm weapon that's going to target organics, but at the same time, it's going to protect their droid army. So it adds another element to it. And it just really contests, like, what it means to be a peacekeeper versus adhering to your values of being neutral. Like, well, we colonized this planet. We wanted to avoid your war, but eventually war is going to come on your doorstep. So there's definitely a lot to cover with this episode, and you pretty much nailed it. There's a lot going on here, and a lot lot to discuss. So
Yeah.
bring it back
And
to you.
that's a reoccurring theme. It's like everyone who doesn't want to be part of the war, it's just going to happen. And then to go back to what you're going with, Ryan, about how these things are so entertaining. There's a lot of messages, but also a lot of great voice acting too. Because I'm going to get a little deep dive right in here because
Oh, all
we
right. I missed
are
it.
we
I
are
know where you're going with this.
we,
I know where you're going with this. Take it away.
I
because
don't know where
one
this
of the
is
voice
going. I'm
actors,
excited.
one of
Sorry.
the voice actors in this episode was none other than George Takei.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he's
Well, tell the
definitely.
viewers who he was voicing.
I mean, he was actually voicing the separatist leader Lorca Durd, if I got that name right. But yes, we all know George Takei. He's definitely a big Star Trek actor, but now he's crossed into the Star Wars universe and he's voicing a separatist Bombad general. And I'm gonna use the Gungan Jar Jar's wording of bad guys and just say he's a Bombad general in this episode.
Yeah, he is a Bombad general in a way. Uh, but yeah, it was very nice to see him voice, and you get a lot of great voice acting in
Is,
these episodes.
is this the first Star Trek Star Wars crossover chronologically? We haven't been able to identify, right? No Simon Pegg, none of the newer guys. This
This
might
is
be
the
the
first
very
one.
first meshing of the two
I mean,
No,
I think that even
whoa, whoa, whoa.
came out before The Force Awakens. So yeah, like George Takei is probably the first official
Yeah,
Star Trek
Star
actor
Trek,
who's
Star Wars.
crossed the void into Star Wars. So let's go, George Takei. Yeah.
Hey, and if we're wrong, voice off in the comments. I mean,
Call us off right
maybe
now. Come
some
on,
true
bring
Trekkie.
it, bring it,
Tell
bring
me
it.
I'm an idiot. Just do that.
I love the deep dive there. Nice,
Yeah.
nice steal for
That
this.
was a great one, and I didn't even pick up on that or know that. So that
I
was
did. I was waiting for the end, but the fact that you brought it out at the beginning is like, I know where you're going with this. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not hate? Well, how George Takei is awesome.
Yeah. So George Takei, thank you for coming into the Star Wars universe and blessing us with this episode. A lot of respect to you, man. All right, Ryan. I think you want to dive into some topics, so let's discuss.
Yeah. So right off the bat, we get some new characters. They do refer to the Lurmen as colonists again, so they are sticking with that theme, which I liked. When they finally arrive, the Separatists arrive. Did anyone else catch this? Anakin says, "We will be okay if we make it to the tall grasses," which I thought was funny because, at least from my perspective, the tall grasses were maybe 5 feet away, 6 feet away. Like, it didn't seem like it was far for them to go hide in the tall grasses.
You know what's funny? It's like, now that you mention it, the first thing that came in my mind was the Lost World Jurassic Park. Don't go into the long grass.
That's a good reference. Luckily for them, it pays off, right? They get
Luckily, there was
a
a velociraptor.
ground or a tree. Then we get this amazing scene. And I say it's amazing because it's such a classic comedic kind of trope, maybe, where our George Takei character asks for volunteers from the droids, and all the droids step back except for two. And I chuckled. It got me. I was like, that is, it's, you've seen it time and time again. It's such a funny little trope that just like, yep, we all step back. So the people that look like they step forward, and sure enough, they get volunteered. And what do they get volunteered for, Tom?
We are talking about a napalm testing. It is pretty much a bomb catapult system where they just let fire and rain just go destroy anything living. And just to make sure that its function was to destroy everything living except droids.
AKA the defoliator capsule, as they put it. So you got this big.
I like that you pointed that out because it's going to come to my quote later, but keep talking. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So I mean, to your point with the whole comedic approach, you got all the droids. then you got these two droids like, oh yeah, I'm gonna volunteer, but at the same time, you got Rex and Bly trying to do recon, like, why are the separatists here? And then they realize like, oh crap, they're testing out a new toy and they don't really know the effects, and you just see this mortar like arcing up in the air, like, oh crap, we gotta run. And thank God they were able to escape. And yeah, unfortunately, it has a very devastating result. And you have even Count Dooku is getting involved, and you could say you can accuse him of war crimes with the way they're testing it on this neutral planet. And I was like, okay, great. We tested it on organic matter. Now let's test it on civilians. So it's like, I mean, you could, for Count Dooku, whether we saw him in Tales of the Jedi in the Clone Wars, now he's like, oh yeah, I'm just a full genocide killer, wanting to test this new weapon on innocent civilians. Like, oh yeah, like who cares? Like, no one's gonna know about this. It's like, I mean, it's awful, but
it makes me.
unfortunately,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
just the whole like, talking about like, with these droidicas and the way, based on living organisms, unfortunately, they're going to this whole warmongering, making a profit. It's like, hey, if this works out, we're going to do this. We're going to go forward and mass produce this defoliator capsule that's really going to wipe out the clones. It's going to wipe out the Jedi. We're going to have an easy path to victory. Separatists all the way, droids unharmed. Woo-hoo. Like,
it's very interesting to see it, because going back to the malevolence, we're seeing the separatists get creative and find new ways to help win the war. Because the Republic, they're meat and potatoes. It's, we have the Jedi, we have a clone army, that's all we need. They're looking at it a different way. It's like, well, how do you draw out the Jedi? By causing harm to innocents.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, Tom, it's versus the EMP projectile, and they're shooting it from far, and they've got the range where they can shoot it out. They're not going to get touched. And now we're talking about this this napalm nuke, whatever you want to call it, where we're going to target innocent civilians, but at the same time, our droid armies are safe from this bomb. So
not just innocent civilians, and that's what I want to talk about. I mean, this thing takes out all organic life.
yeah.
And I think this is wild right now. I'm about to freaking go off a little bit. Very
Go
much.
for it.
Buckle up, folks.
One, we're at a new year. This is episode 33. I want to take it back to episode 1, where the quote that I had pulled out in episode 1 was, "Everywhere there is life, value it, honor it." That was told to baby Ahsoka. And now we're 33 episodes in chronologically, and this is a perfect example of that not being followed, right? I mean, they are not valuing life here at all. And it's, it'd be one thing if it was truly a droid army, but I mean, this is another living being controlling this army, right? It's not like it's just a droid that have become completely, self-reliant. The commanders of these armies are still living beings, right? But where I get off the rails, and something I noticed while I decided to say what I just said, not only is this our first episode of 2024, we're in the new year, but it's episode 33, which means we are halfway, guys. We're halfway to our episode 66.
Okay, that I'm gonna call that the deep dive.
This is a special episode now. It's a special episode.
It better be the Instagram post of the week when it comes time.
It just popped.
The time has come. Execute Order 66. Let's go.
We're halfway there.
Hide your Padawans, hide your lightsabers. The clones are coming.
We'll see what happens. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we're still by episode 66. We'll probably still be in the Clone Wars. Unfortunately,
yeah.
It would have been really.
But fortunately, it's a lot of great content too. Great content to share.
Of course. But I just meant. But who knows? I'm not gonna count ahead. Who knows what episode 66 will be? Maybe it will somehow involve something relevant. But that.
Now that you mention that, I do have a funny story to bring up. Just because I was getting food. I was getting lunch at work the other day, and I put in my order. I guess we can all figure out what my order number was.
I hope
66. Damn. Let's
And
go.
you know what? The next thing it's like they said to me is like your order is number 66. And I just respond, it'll be done, my lord.
There we go.
um so we get this testing of this weapon. We get this and I guess again I'm pointing out episode 33 because people like to be excited about episode 50 and episode 100, and we will be, but I think episode 33 and episode 66 are going to be
halfway.
important episodes. That being said, so yes, they're testing this weapon on peaceful people, which is just atrocious, right? It's an absolute atrocity. We do get, because I talked about the volunteers stepping forward, so our heroes, Anakin, Ahsoka,
Rex and Bly, and yeah, I think that's it.
what's her name?
Ayla.
Ayla, thank you. So they decide they see this weapon in action, they see the base that has been built, and they decide they got to go take out this base, and to distract the droids guard out on patrol outside this base, we get a cameo. I think our first ever cameo from a famous band, but we get a Rolling Stone cameo.
The Rolling Stone.
You get it? It was kind of a joke. So Rolling Stone. So Anakin uses the Force to roll a rock around, or a stone, by the droids to distract them, and it's a long scene. That's why and as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, Rolling Stone. And that was,
Now that you mention it, you know what I thought? You ever see that commercial with a guy with a fishing pole and he's got the dollar over there?
And the dollar bill, yeah.
You almost had it.
Well, so I made the joke Rolling Stone, but then, you made the reference to napalm, which, was very relevant in what war, Tom?
Vietnam, baby.
And I would argue, what's the most Vietnam song? Like, what's the most famous song? When you think helicopters in Vietnam, what song are you thinking? Is it a Rolling Stone song? Because it might be a Rolling Stone song.
I hate to say it, but you're going to be wrong. You're going to hate me for this. But when I think of Vietnam and helicopters and all that stuff, I'm thinking about the song Surfing Bird. Bird. No,
I'm thinking of Sympathy for the Devil.
No, I'm thinking, yeah, Sympathy for the Devil or Paint It Black. I feel like are two very quintessential
Sympathy for the Devil was.
But you're talking about 60s rock. Like,
games. Yes.
Because not just that, you're also talking about Jimi Hendrix. There's a lot of other The Who. There's a lot of other.
It's true.
Rock.
I'm just wondering if the writers of this had the Rolling Stone as a nod to the fact that we're no longer in World War II, right? We've always been referencing these World War II references. We finally have Vietnam reference with napalm, and that gets to the point where they come back to our city of or our colony, right? It's a colony because they're colony.
Pod Central, yeah.
Yep. We come to the Lerman colony, and it's time to defend them. And luckily they have the shield generators, and they throw up the shield generators. But while this kind of battle's happening, and the really cool scene where the Jedi and the clones do all right, let's do this, and they kind of step through the shield.
Yeah.
So they come on the outside.
I just want to take a time out right there.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
So, like, when the Separatists first land, I mean, you see the leader, like, you guys got to go hide, and I'm going to go out and introduce myself and make it very clear. We're very neutral. Just the way, like, with the way the Republic and the Jedi landed versus the Separatists, it's a different context. And just...
Hold on. I want to interrupt. So the Republic haven't really landed, right?
Well, I mean, they crashed.
That's what happens at the end of this episode. We see are people that crash landed, which is a little different.
Right. I mean, Ahsoka had the
kind of what's said at the end. Sorry.
I mean, you had Ahsoka, like, it's like, oh, we're the master of crash landing and demolishing our ships or whatever. But it's just like, with the way the Republic came in, like, yes, they crash landed, but they came in like, hey, we're not here on purpose, but we've got a friend who's seriously wounded. He needs medical help. Please help us out. But with the way you see the separatists come in, they're like, oh yeah, Locked Earth, Separatist Alliance, you're under protection, kind of like what we saw a few weeks ago with the whole Rhodia incident with but then you see the droids coming in, they're like, oh, let's just destroy Pod Central, and they're already taking it down. And then you see the leaders like, oh, well, we're not going to do anything. And then you have the son, the healer, he's like, well, we got to do something. We got to defend ourselves. And you have this whole concept of, well, we got to stay true to our values, and just like, well, at what cost? So like we kind of talked about last week with what it means to be a peacekeeper versus being neutral in this war, but like now we see this new theme of like, at what cost do you need to sacrifice your values now that war has come onto your doorstep? And it goes into your quote at the beginning, Ryan. So
And
like,
to be honest, I want to make another war reference is more of like with the leader of the colonists. This is one of those situations like in history, before World War II. This is a Hitler versus Neville Chamberlain giving Germany Czechoslovakia to keep peace, not realizing their peace was never going to be the option in the end. Like Germany was going to invade Poland right after. Like
Yeah, again, so like Mike said, the quote, when surrounded by war, one must eventually choose a side. And that's what I kind of was getting at in the beginning, where I said this episode really touches on a very dark theme. I mean, is it, and brings up a hell of a question, like, is it actually possible to when in a war to remain neutral? Like, is there such thing as neutrality? I mean, you could argue obviously like children or like that, but at some point, like, surrounded by it, you have to take some form of a side, whether you're an active fighter in it or, and that's kind of what this brings up is like, can you really just sit there and be like, no, we're not going to participate? And it's interesting. Like,
Switzerland will disagree.
yeah, I mean, there were
right.
like a couple examples that came off right off the bat. So I mean, like, first is just like, well, are we just going to sit around and die? And you have the leader saying, like, if it's our fate to die, so be it. And it's just like you're really going to accept that? Like, I mean, you would want, if you really believe this concept of, being neutral and like, staying to life, like you want to do something to defend it. And then the fact that the droids came in, I mean, yeah, they probably destroyed some stuff, and they're shooting blasters in the air like raiders in like the Wild West would just come around, just shooting, like just randomly destroying, trying to intimidate. Like the fact is, like, the leader is coming in, it's like, oh yeah, they did nothing wrong. I'm like, really? You're okay with what's going on? And just like it, I was just amazed that, like, I mean, like, I get we talked about the hypocrisy in this, but it's just like you would want to do something, like you want to defend your neutrality, but he's like, well, if we're gonna jump into this battle, we're kind of like sacrificing our code of being neutral. And just it's just amazing just to see like how they responded with now we have the separatists on their doorstep, and like they've got this different tone of like, you're under our protection, but we're going to do these random raids or whatever. It's just amazing that they just sat by and just let them get away with it. It's just
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, they just kind of rolled over. But we see that our protection is just a flat out lie, because the real plan when he talks to Dooku is, hey, I'm going to test this out on this colony, and we're gonna wipe them out and see if this just cooks them all. So we do
and
get
also the leader was like, Jedi, what menace have you brought onto us? It's like,
like it was that
he was very quick to blame the Jedi, because I know, like, even last week's episode, he was saying that, like, oh well, you're gonna bring evil upon us. The fact that you're here, it's just like, well, okay, but like as we clearly see, like this was not the Jedi's fault.
Yeah, and that happens, right? There's times where they bring the war to where they show up, and we see that throughout the series. But in this case, the Separatists had no idea they were there.
Yeah.
They showed up with plans to test this weapon on a far planet. Like, that was it.
If the Jedi weren't there, they would have gotten away with it and no one would have caught wind of it.
Yep.
And like, I mean, you can say what we want about them being there, about the Jedi being there, but thank God they were there, because had they not been there, they this probably would have been mass deployed, and the war would have been turned. The war would have had a different ending where the separatists would have won, like, or they wouldn't have been fast enough to respond to this biological weapon or biological napalm, however we want to call it.
Napalm.
And yeah, it's just
Well, that's going to lead into, so they fight the battle droids. Anakin makes a blitz to the leader, and we get to the point where Anakin overpowers everybody, and the leader, who's what was it?
Lock Dirt or
Lock
George
Dirt.
Takei, yeah.
Dude, he yells out as he's running away, "Help, I will be defoliated," which is really funny because, the definition of defoliate is to wipe out all the, organic material, the brush, which is napalm is a defoliator. So it was kind of funny that he used the term that he was basically weaponizing. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know like what your quote is for this episode, but
I was that right there.
All right, well,
hope I will be defoliated.
Well, I mean, the quote for me for this episode was just the whole contrast between the Lurmen and the Jedi. It's like, yeah, we want no part of this, and Anakin just comes in like, you know what? You respect your code. We're gonna respect our code, even if you don't agree. And he just flat out was like, we're gonna come in and defend. So, like, I know the episode for this week was Defenders of Peace, but the Jedi showed that concept with this week. Even if they disagree how they go about being the Defenders of Peace, but yeah, I mean, you just saw like with the Jedi and the clones, like there were only 5 of them, but they took out like at least 3 squads of battle droids, a weapon. You clearly saw in action that the Jedi were willing to stand up. I mean, they can't ignore what happened between this defoliator weapon and the fact that the separatists came here by accident to test out a new weapon. Like you clearly saw that for this week, the Jedi's stood up to their values and they defended peace. I mean, unfortunately, it was through combat, but
well, you know what? I'm the hot take, maybe taking the words and language. The name of the episode's Defenders of Peace. The Jedi aren't peace, right? They never say they're peace. They say they're the defenders of peace. And one could argue that the Lurmen are the embodiment of peace, right? They don't want to get involved. They just want to live their lives. They are peace. But somebody needs to defend peace, and that's what the Jedi do. Therefore, absolutely living up to being the embodiment of the defenders of peace, because they are going to defend this peaceful colony, and even whether they want it or not, right?
It's a different word for Jedi
you
now.
want to ensure peace.
Keepers of the peace. It's defenders now at this point.
But at what cost? So, I mean, I think that was also another quote dropped at the beginning, and that was the leaders like, yeah, like, well, we appreciate you guys to doing this, but at what cost? So I know we've been talking about this whole concept of war and the way it changes everybody, but we definitely see this happening here. And unfortunately, it's more on the Lurmen. It's like, yeah, we want to be neutral in this, but at the very last minute, you have the son arguing against the father. It's like, we have to get involved. Like, we can't just sit idly by and let the droids commit genocide upon our species. Like, we have to do something. So we see with what we saw in last week's episode with the Griffin, you see them, they're still using their ropes and they're not really killing anyone. They're letting the Jedi take care of it. And you saw like them roping around like an entire squad of droids, and you have Ahsoka coming in with lightsaber on the ground, just chopping their heads off. Boom. And I mean, at least they're adhering to it, but yeah, it's at what cost?
I'm going to throw out another quote from another bit of Star Wars that we are nowhere near, but we'll get to it eventually. And that's, I gotta try to remember it. It's, congratulations, you're being rescued. Do not resist. And that's, that's what's happening. And that's, but that's what's happening. Like the Jedi show up and like, hey, we're gonna save you whether you want it or not. Like, try not to resist this, and that's it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't imagine what like the leaders like looking upon like, oh crap, now after just going through this battle and we got saved by the Jedi. Now we have 3 Republic attack cruisers coming in. Like, what does this mean for us now? So I don't think we'll be able to see what happens afterwards. But at the very least, they still live. At the end of the day, the Lermans still live. They can adhere to their codes, but again, at what cost? So I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely with last week's episode and this week's episode, it's a different change of pace from all the battles, and unfortunately, with these past 2 episodes, we just see a neutral planet, and we see our Clone Wars or our Republic and Separatists coming into this neutral world with different uh with with different objectives. I mean, you had the Republic very clearly. It's like, yeah, Anakin needs to get we need a we need to give Anakin the medical attention and find a way off this planet. And then you have the Separatists come in. It's like, oh hey, we got this biological test weapon where we're gonna not only destroy organic life, but we're also going to kill innocent civilians. So it really brings a different perspective from what we saw with the season 1 episodes and Tales of the Jedi we've seen so far. So definitely a hot topic, but I think between the 3 of us, we definitely covered a lot, and we see a lot of the callbacks to either World War I or World War II.
War
But
is
yeah,
hell, man. War brings out the worst in people.
and it changes us like whether we like it or not. So
True.
any hot takes, deep dives, or Easter eggs before he closes out, fellas?
I mean, yeah, I think the only hot take slash theory I had was what you said. It's like, uh, anywhere where there's Jedi, people are going to start to think there's going to be trouble, and it's going to make them, it's going to give them a bad reputation moving forward within the Republic for the
Yeah,
Jedi.
it's unfortunate that the Lermans, like with the way they did, they're like, oh, there's Jedi here, they're not evil's far behind. But yeah, unfortunately, we saw that come true, but we just didn't really see that. Oh, because the Jedi here now, the Separatists are coming, we're engaging in battles. You had the 2 factions coming in with different objectives in mind. So yeah, it's quite the powerful episode that we had these past 2 weeks. So
I got
I'm
nothing else.
trying to think if I got like a comparison to something, but I think I hit them all.
yeah,
Um,
I think we really did a deep dive into this, and
I
we
stand
really
by my hot take.
brought the
Yeah,
connections out between what we see, portrayed in other TV series or anything, or just our understanding of war. It's just unfortunately, it was well communicated in this animated episode. But yeah, I think to your point from last week, Ryan, you know, cartoon shows, yeah, not really meant for adults, but they really bring real life and real world concepts into the big picture. So
I think they are meant for it. I think that's the thing. My argument is that,
yeah,
and again, I've said it early on in early episodes that I was a proponent of, like, for a very long time. My thought was, oh, it's a cartoon, like it's animated. But I mean,
yeah, I
real
think we really, I mean, so
serious theme, something. This is nothing that I think a kid watching this isn't going to pick up on this stuff. They're going to see it and they're going to think, "Ooh, cool, lemurs." Look at the monkeys. They're not gonna necessarily, or the funny stuff that we pointed out. They're not gonna know that this is how dark this really is.
yeah, this is definitely more on the extreme end of the spectrum when you put it from that lens for a little kid standpoint. But yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, for all the whatever history classes, all the Star Wars movies and episodes we watch, no matter how many times, yeah, unfortunately, it brings that concept into it, and yeah, it's pretty powerful.
All right. Well, happy episode 33. Halfway there, guys. Halfway there.
Halfway to Order 66.
we're halfway there. Living on a
Living on
scare.
air.
And happy New Year,
Anyways,
everybody.
anyways, it's a wrap. Thank you everyone for joining 3 Simple Men making their way through that galaxy. happy 2024. We're excited for all the new content that we're bringing to you guys. Hit that like, comment, subscribe, and come back next week for some more Clone Wars content. May the Force be with you always.